All right. So the Rebbe was explaining over here that the avodah of Yitzchak by Yizra means he was sowing. He was sowing Torah and mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs brings growth, brings elevation, and um, and this was the general idea. Sowing means Torah and mitzvahs, and the Torah and mitzvahs brought about the great Meir Sha'orim by Vorcheu Hashem, brings about all the blessings. Just like when you sow, you get a lot of produce. So he sowed, so he get a lot. He got uh, a lot of the hatzlocha, a lot of the blessings. But the Rebbe is going to explain now that there is Bamis, and we translate that. What does it mean to sow Torah mitzvahs? That Torah mitzvahs, to sow means that the Eibishter basically sowed Torah mitzvahs. Torah mitzvahs are the seed which is above. The fact that the Eibishter brings down the Torah mitzvahs in this world in physical matter, that means the Eibishter is sowing. It's the zeriya into dvarim gashmim, and then it grows. But here we're saying that the sowing is not being done by Hashem, but it's being done by Yitzchak, by Yizra Yitzchak. There is another level in which the sowing is done taka by Yitzchak, as the Rebbe will bring down. The work that the Nefesh Elikis does with the Nefesh Abahamis is also Zriya. There is the general Zriya Bechlal, that Torah mitzvahs come down to this world. That's Zriya in a general way. And then you have the Zriya that Yitzchak, that Ayid does with his Avodah, that he involves the Nefesh Abahamis in the Avodah of the Nefesh Elikis, that is sowing the Nefesh Abahamis and then gaining a lot from the Nefesh Abahamis. Gimel, let's look inside. It's explained in many places. The fact that Torah and mitzvahs are referred to, that they are sown, there's Zriya. Koi al hayirida the Torah mitzvahs lihislabish bidvarim gashmim. That refers to the descent of Torah mitzvahs to dress up in physical matter. That's called sowing. Sowing is to, like we sow in the ground, you bring it down in physical matters. You take the Torah mitzvahs and you bring it down into physical matters. Shakavona says, what is the intent? Why do we sow in the ground? Why does the Eibishter sow and bring Torah mitzvahs in physical matters? Shakavona bazehi litzoida chaliyah. The intent over here is for the purpose of an elevation. The Eibishter brings down in Gashmis to actually bring it and make it higher. בארץ. Similarly to the sowing in the ground, שהיא בשביל הצמיחה בריבוי יסר מכמו שהיה בתחילה, the purpose is that it should grow more than it was in the beginning. So you sow a little bit and you get a lot of return. The same thing here, the Torah mitzvahs comes down into the world so that it descends into the world, but then the Torah mitzvahs got it to be much higher. But here we're learning about who's doing this. Is generally talking about that the mitzvahs were brought down in Gashmis. So, but here we're talking about Yitzchak sowing. So we need to understand that according to this explanation, Haloshon Zeriya b'Torah mitzvahs. So the language of sowing, when it talks about Torah mitzvahs, Shaykh B'negei l'Hakadosh Baruch Hu. That applies, that connects to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shehu, he, Hashem, hoirid ha-Torah mitzvahs lemata. He brought the Torah mitzvahs down below, so he does the sowing. But v'loi b'negei l'kiyum ha-Torah mitzvahs deha'adam, but this is not in connection to the observance of the Torah mitzvahs of the person. The person doesn't seem like he's sowing anything. That's the Eibishter doing the sowing. That's the Eibishter bringing down the mitzvahs and gashmis. That means that the Eibishter sows the Torah mitzvahs into the ground. Why are we saying over here that Yitzchak is sowing? For the fact that the pasuk says that Yitzchak sowed, move on, it's understood. Agam kiyum ha-Torah mitzvahs. The ha'adam, that also the observant, the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs that the person does, it's a descent for the purpose of an elevation. So the purpose of the Torah mitzvahs that a Yid does is also ziriyah, also to get an aliyah. When the Yid sows, he gets an aliyah. What is exactly the sowing of the Yid in the elevation? We can say the explanation what's brought down in the Maimer in the end. Another explanation in the light that has been sown for the tzaddik. The light that the tzaddik gets through the sowing. The oir la tzaddik that he was a ruah, that it was sown. So he says in the Maimer, the inyan haziriyah, ulizroya b'nefesh habahamis, hamshochas seichel umides shenefesh elikis. What is the idea of sowing? Is to sow in the animal soul and extend the intellect and emotions of the nefesh godly soul. This godly soul has its intellect and its emotion. When the godly soul sows its intellect and emotions into the nefesh habahamis, that is the ziriyah of the nefesh alikis, the ziriyah in the nefesh habahamis. Shal yidei zenaset tzmiyacha v'aliyah b'haseichel v'amidas the nefesh alikis. Through this sowing into the nefesh habahamis from the nefesh alikis, this brings an elevation in the seichel and the midas of the godly soul. How come? How does the godly soul become elevated through the sowing in the nefesh habahamis? So he explains the kivon shahashoidesh the nefesh habahamis ulamailo mehashoidesh the nefesh alikis. Since the root of the animal soul is higher than the root of the godly soul, because we know that the nefesh habahamis has a higher soul, higher source than does the godly soul. The nefesh halikis shorsho betikun. The godly soul's root is in tikun. That's in atzilus. The nefesh habahamis shorsho betoyu is rooted in toyu, which is higher than atzilus. Lochein, and therefore, al yidei zriyas seichel umidas the nefesh alikis benefesh habahamis, through the sowing of the seichel and midas of the godly soul in the nefesh habahamis, naset tzmicha aliyah benefesh alikis, that makes growth, an elevation in the godly soul. So basically, this is a whole new level in sowing. There's one thing that the Eibishter sows, brought down the Torah mitzvahs begashmis. This level of sowing that we're talking about, Yitzchak is talking about when the nefesh alikis sows into the nefesh habahamis, and it has an aliyah because of the root of the nefesh habahamis, which is higher than the nefesh halikis. The Rebbe points out over here that this is, in this Maimer, it's more than what it says in Likutei Torah. In Likutei Torah, it doesn't talk about the avodah of the nefesh halikis, nefesh with the nefesh habahamis. Over there, it says the nefesh halikis coming down to the nefesh habahamis. But in this Maimer, it talks about specifically sowing, meaning to work with the nefesh habahamis, ulahoyir, to point out. The Likutei Torah Mevur in Likutei Torah, it's explained Sha'oir Zoru Allah Tzadik, that this light which has been planted for the Tzadik Koi Al Yiridas Nefesh Halikis Li Slabish Benefesh Abamis. That refers to the descent of the godly soul to descent in the animal soul. Umeloshon Hamaymer Lizroya Benefesh Habahamis Hamshochas. But the Maimer's language to sow in the nefesh habahamis, to extend the seichel midas nefesh lekis nefesh habahamis, we're not just talking about the descent of the nefesh lekis in the nefesh habahamis. We're talking to sow into the nefesh habahamis, seichel midas shel nefesh lekis. Take your godly seichel, mashma. Sha'odom tzorich lizroya haseichel umidas the nefesh alakis benefesh habahamis. It appears there that the person needs to sow. It's not just that he has descended, the Eibishter brought down the nefesh alakis into the nefesh habahamis, but the person needs to sow the seichel and the midas of the nefesh alakis and nefesh habahamis. That's the avodah of Yizra. So the Rebbe explains it. What does it mean that the nefesh alikis works with the nefesh habahamis to so that? Well, you know, the idea is the avodas haneshama, that in the service of the soul, gam la'achrei yiridos lemato, even after it descends below. When the neshama, before the neshama descends below, it only has avodas haneshama. But even after the neshama comes down into the body, it has two avodas. Yeshnam shnei efanim. There is two ways of the service of the neshama. Avodas haneshama mitzad atzma, the service of the neshama on its own for the neshama. V'avidoso, and the service levarer es nefesh habahamis, to sort out the animal soul, the nefesh halikis working on itself, on its own, and also the nefesh halikis working with the nefesh habahamis. B'zeu pirush lizroya haseichel umidas the nefesh halikis b'nefesh habahamis. The second avodah, that the neshama works with the nefesh habahamis, this is the meaning that we sow the seichel and the midas of the nefesh halikis into the nefesh habahamis. Ki haseichel v'hamidas the nefesh halikis k'moshe heim mitzad atzma. Just the fact that you have a godly soul that has intellect and emotion, and it was brought down into the guf, doesn't mean that the nefesh halikis is going to impact the nefesh habahamis. You're going to have to work. You have to sow to impact the nefesh habahamis. Ki haseichel v'hamidas the nefesh halikis k'moshe heim mitzad atzma. The seichel of the nefesh halikis, even as, and the midas, even as they are on their own, gam la'achrei yiridas haneshama lemata, even after the descent of the neshama below, efsher sheyiyeh al yodom birur nefesh habahamis. It's impossible that through them will be the sorting out the nefesh habahamis. Just because you got a nefesh halikis there doesn't impact, doesn't affect the nefesh habahamis. It doesn't mevarer the nefesh habahamis. Gam la'achrei b'chdei sheyifalu b'nefesh habahamis. So in order to impact the nefesh habahamis, Hu al yidei yiridosom v'hislapshusom b'haseichel v'hamidus the nefesh habahamis. Is through the seichel and the midas of the nefesh elikis descending and dressing up into the seichel and the midas of the nefesh habahamis. That's the way to impact. You have to bring down the nefesh elikis intellect and emotions into the intellect and emotion of the nefesh habahamis. That is zriya. That means sowing. That you're bringing it down into the nefesh habahamis. Yesh loymar. So this is when we talk about the nefesh elikis, nefesh habahamis, the seichel and the midos, that's basically the emotional state where your nefesh habahamis should be. It should be on the level of impacted by the nefesh elikis, but that's talking about mainly on the spiritual level. Now, what the Rebbe says, the same thing is on the practical mitzvah level, that we have to impact also the in the act of the mitzvahs, is when we do the mitzvahs practically, when we do the mitzvahs b'maisa in Asiya, we're actually making that mitzvah grow, because we're bringing down the chayis, an energy, into the mitzvah. When we do a mitzvah, we're doing it down in Asiya, but then we're having the mitzvah grow. Let's look inside. Yesh loymar shal derech zeh, similar to this, that the nefesh elikis impacts and changes the nefesh habahamis, similarly is by mitzvahs, we impact and we change the act of, by doing the act of the mitzvah, we actually change it around. In order that the Torah mitzvahs that we do should have energy, should be energized, should be a vitalized Torah mitzvahs who. So when is Torah mitzvahs done? So there is an emotional state. There is hukshekiyum ha-Torah mitzvahs hu ba'ava v'yira. When you do Torah mitzvahs with love and with awe and fear of Hashem, that's the energy. Then that mitzvah is alive. So then you want to transmit that energy into in the mitzvah. When you actually do the mitzvah, that emotional state, that higher state, into the mitzvahs, you have to bring it down into ma'aseh. So that this fear and love, that is the soul. It's like the nefesh elikis before. This is the soul, has the Ava V'yira. So through the Ava V'yira of the soul, you want that Ava V'yira should have that vitality in the act of mitzvahs. So then, that is you parcha le'ela. So then, if the mitzvahs are done, that level of fear and love that you have in your heart, the neshama has, it transfers that when you do the mitzvah, you do it with Ava V'yira, and then these mitzvahs that you do can fly above, which means they're elevated. Hu al yidei yiridosom v'hislapshusom b'ha'asiya daha mitzvah. That is through descending and dressing up in doing of the mitzvah. When you physically get dressed up in the mitzvah, then the Ava V'yira are elevated through the act that you invest in the act of the mitzvah. Zehu shekiyum ha-Torah mitzvahs deha-adam nikra b'shem zriya. That's why when the person fulfills Torah mitzvahs, it's called zriya. By Yizra Yitzchak, that's Yitzchak sowing. because you're sowing, because you're bringing it down in the Maisa mitzvahs, and then it can fly above, then it can grow, then it's parcha le'ela. You have to descend and dress up in the act of the mitzvah so that later on the mitzvahs can go and fly above higher, which they don't have before they dress up in the Gashmis. So the reason that they dress up in Gashmis is that's the sowing. It's the sowing in order to get the elevation. So it comes from the Avavira of the soul, but we transfer that Avavira of the soul into the act of the mitzvah, and then it is parcha le'ela, goes to the highest level. Oh. So now the Vayizra Yitzchak is part of the avodas of Yitzchak, and then the blessing that he gets, that's the result. So that's already the tzmicha. The tzmicha is the result of the zriya. So he says that these blessings, the pasuk says that he sowed and he found meya she'orim, that's already the result, that's the blessing. Dalet. Hine al pi hanal, based on the above. Sha'avoida de vayizra Yitzchak hizriyas. What is the avoida of Yizra Yitzchak? That is sowing. Sowing means yeridas v'yislapshus hakoichas de nefesh halikis. That's the descent and the dressing up of the powers of the nefesh halikis. Bikiyum ha-mitzvahs. In observance of the mitzvahs, you bring it down the chayis of the nefesh halikis. Or ubebiru nefesh habahamis, in the words of the Maimer before, to sort out the nefesh habahamis. Tzorich loymar. So we have to say that when the pasuk says she'inyan vayimtzo meya she'orim, that he found meya she'orim, huloi hamshocha milmaylo habo al yidei kiyum ha'toiro mitzvahs mitzad atzmo. That it's not talking about something that came from above because of the observance of Torah mitzvahs on their own. You do Torah mitzvahs, you get the Amshocha. No, it's Amshocha because you invested. Elo, Haliyah, the Nefesh Halikis. This is the elevation of the godly soul. When the godly soul's powers descend into the act of mitzvahs, and to sorting out the one's animal soul, that's the tzmicha shal yidei hazriya. That is growing, that's through sowing. Sometimes you can get a blessing from the Eibishter which is not associated with your sowing. You don't have to sow it in order to get the blessing. But here, the Vayimtzo is a hemshech. It's a follow-up to Vayizra. He invested. He brought down the Nefesh Elikis to be Mevar, the Nefesh Abahamis, and to give a chayis in the mitzvahs. And then the result of it is the Meya Shorim. Now, what are we trying to say? That the Meya Shorim that the person gets is a personal level of growth. The Meya Shorim that you get is a personal level of growth that you got because of your investment in the mitzvahs with the chayis of the Nefesh Elikis into the Nefesh Abahamis. So because of that, that's why you get that blessing. So he explains now what exactly is the blessing of Meya Shorim. He says that Meya Shorim is actually 100, which is 2 times 50. 50 is the level of Bina. In Bina itself, there's 2 levels in Bina. 50 and 50 is 100. And that's the level that was given, that was elevated to Yitzchak as a blessing from the sowing that he did. As explained in the Maimer, the Meyo Sha'orim Hem Chamishim Shari Bino Shtei Pomim. Meyo Sha'orim is 50 gates of Bino twice. Why is twice? Why the 2 times 50? The idea is the 2 times the Meyo Sha'orim. The Bino Shtei Madregas Bechlolu. Generally speaking, in Bino, there are 2 steps. There is Yovel and the Sitra de Yovel. Yovel is Chamishim Shona, Bishnasa Chamishim, they have the Yovel. The Jubilee year is the 50th year. So you have actually Yovel, the Rebbe will explain, and also Sitra de Yovel, the side of Yovel, not Yovel itself, not Bina itself, but this. Hello?
Wrong, Rabbi? What's happened?
I have no idea. They disconnected all of a sudden. Let me see. But I don't see you now. Oh, now I see. It just disconnected. No, it disconnected. Okay, what are we up to here? Where's the mimer though? Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. I'm trying to find the mimer. It just shut down. I think maybe the connection got broken or something.
Probably, yeah, because now
Hold on 1 second. I can't find it now. Hold on. Okay, you see it now? Yeah, we have it.
yeah.
So, okay, so the Sitra, the Yovel, and then you have the Yovel and Sitra the Yovel. So Yovel, he says, who have Bina Atzma. Bina, it's Hi, David.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll mamshich tomorrow. I don't know. It keeps on shutting down.
tomorrow.
Okay, then.